Welcome into their episode of Patrick Jones Baseball. Hope you're doing well wherever you're listening at. I've had an interesting weekend. I was in North Dakota visiting family, and on our way back, we had our flight canceled thanks to Delta. So spent the night in St. Paul, Minneapolis, and we're able to actually go to the Twins game. So Twins Phillies. Shout out to Jared Gaynor for hooking us up with some tickets to the Twins game. So that was a ton of fun. But it is what it is. So I'm recording this from the great state of Minnesota instead of back in Cincinnati, which I had anticipated, and uh, and so it's all right. We're making the best of it. But today we're going to talk about game planning. That's going to be today's episode. So I'm going to talk about some analytics when it comes to game planning, what to look for. I'm going to talk about how to come up with a game plan depending on different types of pitchers that you're going to face, and how you can kind of just put pitchers into different blocks, if you will. And so that's what we're going to talk about. And then lastly, I'm going to make this as simplistic as I can and make it so it's applicable to coaches at different levels. So if you're a high school coach or a professional coach in an organization, I think you'll be able to get something valuable out of this if you're a hitting coach. If you don't know who I am, my name is Patrick Jones, and I'm a former hitting coach in the Baltimore Orioles organization. Now I work with hitters in the private sector in Cincinnati, Ohio, and work with players remotely around the country. So when it comes to game planning, I view pitchers as three different types. I put pitchers into three different buckets. The first bucket is what I like to call roll out of bed pitchers. Okay, they roll out of bed pitchers because you can just roll out of bed and beat them. They don't have anything good to beat you with. They don't have great stuff. Their command just okay, and so we don't need to overthink this. I would say that the majority of the pitchers that you face, and maybe not the majority because it's below the average, so maybe a little bit less than average, a little bit less than half the pitchers you face will be roll out of bed pitchers, where you can just roll out of bed, hit them. So we're just going up there. We're looking middle, and we're letting it fly. We're just going to let it rip, look middle. Don't need to overcomplicate it. The deeper in the count you get, we don't need to worry. We don't need to panic because they have nothing to beat us with. So no reason to overcomplicate this. And so that's the first type of pitcher, is the roll out of bed pitcher. And after we go to the roll out of bed pitcher, where they're just lobbing the ball in there and we're constantly just crushing them time and time again, the second type of pitcher is going to be a double take. So we got to do a double take on them. So, we glance over their stuff and we'll glance back one more time. We got to do a double take. So they can beat you, but they don't have the overpowering stuff. They don't have stuff that can just blow us away, but they do have some pitchability. They can go deep in the game, and they can definitely beat us. So there's that type of pitcher that if we just overlook completely, before you know it, we'll have one run in the seventh inning, and we end up losing the game 3-1. That's this type of pitcher. So we need to have some type of a plan, and we need to understand the pitcher's trap. So even though they don't have overpowering stuff, they can still pitch. They have some pitchability. They still understand how to pitch, and they're going to have a trap for us. So whether that's up and in and then low and away, whatever it may be, we need to understand what their trap's going to be, and we need to have some sort of plan to combat that trap, and have a plan in general when we first go up to the plate. So that's the second type of pitcher, is double take. So first type of pitcher, roll out of bed. Second type, which I would say the average, consider this to be the average pitcher that you'll face, is double take. So they can beat you, but doesn't have crazy stuff. Have a plan because they have a trap. And then I would say on the last part is going to be, so the first part was going to be roll out of bed, second double take, and then the last part is going to be a dude. So this is a pitcher who has plus stuff, they have plus command, and they just know how to pitch. So this is going to be the best of the best for whatever league you're at. So this is what we would consider a dude. This would be the third type of a pitcher that I would put into this type of bucket. And so this is going to be the pitcher. Like if you're at the major league level, like this may be the Paul Skeens of the world. He's right now just started the All-Star game, has nasty stuff, and whoever your Paul Skeens is, depending on the level you're at, like this is that type of pitcher. This is a dude. And so when we're facing this type of pitcher, we need to have a plan. That's obvious. But more importantly than just having a plan, because we also had a plan when we're facing the pitcher that's someone who's on average, we have to stick to the plan. So we need to have a plan, stick to it, and then probably the most important part is be okay with whatever the result ends up being. Because this is the type of pitcher that if we have 4 at-bats, we just want to get him one time. And so if we get him one time, like we got to view that as success, because more times than not, he's probably going to get us. And so that's why it's important to just stick with the plan. And when I say stick with it, here's what I mean. A lot of times I see hitters who will go up to the plate, they'll have some sort of plan, and then they'll either get a bad call on them, they'll swing at a bad pitch and look stupid, or maybe they'll just strike out or just get out. And then after their first or second at bat, they abort the plan and then they just revert back to what's ever comfortable for them. You can't do that against this type of pitcher. You have to stick to your plan and then be okay with whatever happens. And if everybody does that on the team, more times than not, you'll get several players who'll get that 1 for 4. They'll get them at least one time. And so you're not going to put up 10 runs against this pitcher, but if you can get 3 or 4, now you give yourself a chance to win. And so this is the third type of pitcher, is a dude. And no matter what level you're at, you're going to be facing these. It's going to be the best of the best. And so it's important to game plan and understand what success looks like against this type of pitcher. And so that's how I would go about facing a dude is, have a plan, and that's going to be just depending on what his stuff exactly is. We're going to go through an example of what that would look like a little bit later on in this episode. But those are the 3 types of pitchers that I would bucket, where the lower end, the average, and then the best of the best, which would be a dude. Now, when I am looking at pitchers that we're going to face, the next thing that I look at is this the type of pitcher that's going to be a high strikeout, high walk pitcher? And the reason why I want to know that is if it's someone who has a lot of strikeouts and a lot of walks, then that means that, we need to be aggressive early in the count like we normally would be. But the deeper in the count we get, the more selective we need to be, because they're probably getting most of their strikeouts by us chasing pitches outside of the zone, by getting other hitters to chase pitches outside of the zone the later on in the count they get, because they have a lot of walks too. So if I see a pitcher with a lot of strikeouts, a lot of walks, we're going to be aggressive early, and then the deeper in the count we get, we're going to shrink the zone, because based off the fact they have high walks too, when they are striking hitters out, it's a lot of times going to be from balls. Hitters are just chasing them, so we need to become more selective. So that's a high strikeout, high walk pitcher, aggressive early, more selective late. Now, if I see someone on the flip side where it's a high strikeout, low walk, we're still going to be aggressive early in the count, but the deeper in the count we get, we still need to be aggressive, and we're not going to be as selective as the high walk pitcher. So we're actually, if anything, we might expand the zone a little bit, knowing that he's still going to be able to command and still probably going to be around the zone later on in the count. So we'll be aggressive early in the count against this high strikeout, low walk pitcher. And then the deeper in the count we get, we'll expand the zone a little bit, but we're still going to be very aggressive. And so I wanted to show this example because this is applicable to all levels, and you also don't need any type of fancy data or anything like that to be able to see the strikeout to walk ratio and what this pitcher has done. So that's one way to utilize statistics to help you incorporate in your game plan for your hitters is this someone who strikes out a lot and then also walks a lot? Or is this somebody who strikes out a lot and then doesn't walk very many? Because I always think it's important to note how a pitcher is going to start hitters off and then how a pitcher likes to finish hitters too. In betweens, going to be a little bit subjective depending on how the at bat goes and depending on who's up. Is it the 3-hole hitter or is it the 9-hole hitter? But generally speaking, the pitcher is going to start hitters off and finish hitters in a manner that's going to repeat. Pitchers are just a lot of times they just repeat the same thing over and over again when it comes to that. They get into those habits. Now, I want to tell everybody a story about a mistake that I made when it comes to game planning and how it kind of bit me. So when I was in the Baltimore Orioles organization as a hitting coach, we were facing a guy, and this was July and August. And so I remember just pulling my laptop up, and I looked over this guy's numbers for the entire season. He didn't have great numbers. His velocity wasn't that great either. And so I just, it made the PowerPoint that I would for that day and didn't think much of it. I think I actually said that, this guy is a guy who doesn't have overpowering stuff. He'd be in that middle tier that we had talked about earlier. And remember that when we first started facing him the very first inning, I thought it was a glitch on the TrackMan because he was sitting 95 to 97 and topping out 98 with a nasty slider. And what I failed to realize was I was looking over his entire numbers for the entire season. And I didn't realize he had been hurt. He had a shoulder injury. So he was kind of up and down with that. And then 2, he had a blister that he was trying to fight through too. What I should have done is I should have solely separated all of his numbers into just what he looked like his previous 2 starts. And so because I didn't do that, I saw his velocity via the average over the entire season, and I saw his numbers from the entire season too. And because of that, the first inning, I remember looking at the TrackMan and then just wanting to crumble into a ball because this is not what we had prepared for. And so that was a mistake that I had made. So going forward, I only really look at the previous 2 starts from that pitcher. Whatever pitcher it is, I'll glance, of course, at what they've done in the past, but I'm only going to really focus on what they've done the last 1 to 2 starts, just because there's so many things that can happen over the course of a season for a pitcher, whether that be they're working on a new pitch that they didn't have earlier in the season. Maybe they had an injury that they didn't have or a blister. And so you don't want to make the same mistake that I did in looking at just all of their numbers. So try to, if you can, see what they've done those last couple starts, not just what they've done throughout the course of the entire season. What the data doesn't show. So what I like to do too, because we can learn a lot from the data, but there's also things that the data doesn't show. And we've all seen guys and pitchers who's like, man, they don't have a great fastball, but the radar gun doesn't say it's hard, but our hitters are just getting everything blown by them. And so this is what I just call what the data doesn't show. So it may be it's hard to pick up pitches. We've all seen different pitchers like this. Maybe he hides the ball well. Look at somebody like Brent Suter for the Cincinnati Reds, a reliever whose fastball tops out at 87 miles an hour. You look at his stuff, even if on TrackMan, nothing he does, none of his pitches say this guy should be getting major leaguers out. But yet he's been in the league now for, 10 years almost now, even though he throws 85 miles an hour, 87 miles an hour as a left-handed pitcher. And so he hides the ball well. It's funky, it's quirky, all of these things. None of these things show up on the stat sheet. So I think it's always important to have a few different bullet points of what doesn't show up on the stat sheet for you as a hitting coach. And it could be something as, hey, this is a guy who maybe we were a little bit patient early on, because when he starts if he walks a few guys, he gets rattled very easily. And so he emotionally gets involved. And so maybe we're going to be a little bit more passive early on because he's a pitcher who gets rattled. It's going to be different depending on the pitcher, but I'm a big fan of keeping a few of these notes if you can get them, and doing some research that doesn't show up on the stat sheet for particular pitchers for this reason. And then the last thing I want to know is, okay, like, how have they had success? Have they had success because, this particular pitcher has hitters chasing outside of the zone or being passive? How have they had success? And then on the opposite end, how have they struggled? So have they struggled because they've walked a lot of guys early on, or have they struggled just because they're leaving, maybe they're breaking pitch over the middle of the plate? What exactly is it? So this will help me be like, okay, they've struggled because of X, Y, and Z. So if we can do X, Y, and Z from a hitting standpoint, then we can have success. And then if we don't do X, Y, and Z, then we're going to fall into that pitcher's trap, and this is how they're going to have success. So now we're going to talk about one example of a pitcher who has some very good stuff. And I think it's important, as we mentioned earlier, we always want to know how pitchers will start us off and then try to finish us too. And so here's it. We're going to go through an actual example of somebody who, starts hitters off a certain way and then is going to try to finish hitters in a different way. So the pitcher we're going to talk about is Logan Webb. So Logan Webb, pitcher for the San Francisco Giants, was an all-star this past season. And so if we look at how he tries to start hitters off and an 0-0 count. So for right-handed hitters, 60% of the time he's going to throw a fastball. 17.4% of the time he's going to throw his sweeper. And then 21.3% of the time he's going to throw his changeup. So that's to right-handed hitters. To left-handed hitters, 53.1% of the time he's going to throw his fastball. 19% of the time he's going to throw his sweeper. And then 27.1% of the time he's going to throw his changeup. So 0-0 count to right-handed hitters and to left-handed hitters. From a percentage standpoint, he's more likely to throw his fastball than any other pitch. And then it's going to be changeup and then sweeper to left-handed hitters, and then changeup and then sweeper to right-handed hitters. So if we're playing the odds, he's more likely to be throwing a fastball 0-0 count to right-handed hitters and left-handed hitters. Now, when we get to 2 strikes, it looks a little bit different. So we get to 2 strikes to right-handed hitters. He's only throwing that fastball 33.3% of the time, and he's throwing the sweeper about 40% of the time, and then the changeup 27.2%. And to left-handed hitters, he's throwing the fastball 40.5% of the time, the sweeper 14.1%, and then the changeup 44.7%. So he's throwing the changeup more than any other pitch with 2 strikes to left-handed hitters, and then he's throwing the sweeper about 40% of the time to right-handed hitters. So again, it's important to know that information. Now, does that mean that, hey, he's feeling his fastball that day? He has really good command over it. And so to right-handed hitters, that fastball is, he's throwing that 60% of the time too with 2 strikes. Of course it could be. That's why it's always important to pay attention to what the pitcher is doing. But it's good to have these numbers because by and large, this is what he's going to do. Pitchers have tendencies. They're creatures of habit. And so a lot of times in the middle of the at-bat, they may go one way or another. But for the most part, they like to start hitters off a certain way and then finish hitters too. And so this is a great example of how they start off a hitter is going to be a little bit different than how they try to finish a hitter. And then, of course, we're going to be looking at velocity when it comes to different pitchers and game planning. As I said earlier, the mistake I made, we want to look at, what the velocity has been recent, not just over the course of the season. And then also another thing is just to look at the extension. So if you have a TrackMan data, what's this pitcher's extension like? Because I've seen before pitchers who threw high 80s, they didn't have great stuff, but because their extension, they were extending so much further out than a lot of the other pitchers, it got on hitters so quickly, and so that allowed them to, their ball just played so much faster, and hitters were just way far behind compared to a lot of the other pitchers faced. I remember when I was again with the Orioles, we had faced a guy who was high 80s and just blowing everybody by, and we were just wondering, why is this? Well, it was because he had a really good extension compared to somebody else. So that's just something else to know. We'll look at release point too. Is this someone who is over the top? Are they 3/4, sidearm? What their release point is going to determine the type of movement on their fastball, and then also the pitch shape too. So the further on top they are, the more behind the ball they're going to be. So if it's someone who's over the top, like a Justin Verlander, remember him back in his prime, he had that nasty curveball, and he had that fastball that had a lot of run on it. Well, he was over the top. So his average release height was 7 feet versus the average major league release height was 6 feet. So he had that good depth on his breaking ball, and his fastball, since he was able to get behind it, it was able to feel like it was rising. It had a lot of that vertical break in his fastball. So the where a pitcher releases the ball can play a very big role into what their pitch shape is going to look like. So even if you don't have TrackMan data, maybe you're just a high school coach out there, educate your hitters on that pitcher's release point, because that's going to determine what type of movement their fastball is going to have, and then also the shape of their breaking pitches too. So lastly, we're going to get into movement plots. So movement plots are important for a variety of reasons, and they're important for a variety of reasons because what it does is it gives you a way to be able to educate your hitters on what type of movement each pitch is going to have. And more importantly, it's going to help individualize it for them personally. And here's what I mean. What I mean is, there's nothing worse than you going up as a hitter. So let's just say I go up as a hitter to the plate myself, and I say, oh man, like this guy's fastball is running inside like crazy. And so I tell that to the next hitter, and he goes up there and he's looking for that fastball that's going to be running in. And he comes back to the dugout after has that bat, and he's like, dude, what are you talking about? His fastball's not moving at all. Well, the way I perceived it maybe is just different than how the next hitter perceived it. And so what these numbers help you is it helps individualize it for each hitter. So if I know what 20 inches of vertical break looks like for me personally, then it doesn't necessarily matter what anybody else, how they perceive it, because I just know what it's like for me. And so that's what this helps individualize it for each hitter. So when it comes to the X axis and the Y axis on this movement plot, the pitch right in the middle, 0-0, is what we call a gyro slider. So we call that a gyro slider right in the middle. And view this as a ball that is like just spinning in a straight line. So just a ball that's spinning in a straight line. View it as like someone throwing a football where it's going straight, but it's spinning. And for this, the only thing that's at play is just the effects of downward gravity. So the only reason the ball even drops is the downward gravity, because overall for this, gravity is taken out of consideration. And so I think that's important to know. So 0-0 on the plot would be a gyro slider. And then the further up we get on these plots is, we're going to have the average fastball, which is about 16 inches of induced vertical break. And so anything to the right of that is going to be more of a arm side run fastball. Anything to the left of the y-axis is going to have more of a cut to it, so be more of a cutter. And it's important to know this, because this is how you go about educating your own hitters on these different pitches. So you have the arm side fastball, they have the average fastball, which is going to be a fastball that doesn't necessarily move a ton it's just a straight fastball. Anything to the right is going to have that arm side run to it. And for it to actually show up so it has arm side run, it's going to need to be significantly different than what it looks like as the average. Further down and right on the upper right-hand quadrant, And I'm doing my best for those listening, you can visualize it. If you can't visualize it, I'm going to also put this up on YouTube so you'll be able to see all the graphs, and it'll be much easier for you to understand. But for the sinker, it'll be going to be below the average fastball, but still above the x-axis, because again, above the x-axis is going to be that backspin on the ball, and then below the x-axis is going to be topspin. So that's going to be the breaking ball pitches. And then, as we had mentioned before, anything to the left of this y-axis up top, but it's still above the x-axis, is going to have some cut to it. So that's why you can kind of understand, it's okay, like here's the average fastball right there. Anything to the right of it, it's going to have arm side movement. Anything to the left of it is going to have cut. Anything above is going to have that pop to it, where it's going to feel like that ball is just rising. And then sinkers are going to be just below, to the right of that average fastball. The slider is going to be on that x-axis. So the further the right the slider is, the more sweep east-west it has. So that's where you're going to see the slider at. The curveball is going to be further down on the y-axis, which is going to be below the x-axis. And the further below you see it, the more depth it has. So view that Clayton Kershaw curveball, which is going to be something that's has a lot of depth to it. It's going to be further down the y-axis. And then the changeup is still going to be above the x-axis, because they're still technically getting behind the changeup. It doesn't have complete topspin like the breaking pitches. So it'll still be above the x-axis. And so now what we'll do is we're going to go back and we're going to talk about a pitcher we already talked about, which is Logan Webb. So Logan Webb is someone who most of his pitches are going to be on that x-axis. And if we remember before, we look over and see his release point. His release point is going to be a little bit lower than the average pitcher. It's going to be closer to that sidearm angle. So because he's not getting behind the ball, he's getting more so around the ball, his pitch movements are going to be east-west. So his slider is going to be very sweepy, a lot of arm side run in his fastball. And so that's how, again, we talk about we can utilize these movement plots. Like this is somebody who is going to have more of that east-west movement on all of their pitches. And so we can even see on his slider, his slider on the x-axis is, further, it was way over its negative 23, 22 inches of horizontal break. And so we can help our hitters understand that, this is someone who, hey, you see this out of his hand, it needs to start in a certain area for it to be a strike. And I also want to preference that for some of your hitters, maybe they just need to know the speed. And so just by understanding the speed, that will help them too. But I think just educating them on the pitch movements too and how to read these can be beneficial for some hitters. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, we're going to go to a player that's more north-south. So Tyler Glasnow. So his pitches are going to be hanging on the y-axis straight up and down, since he's more of the over the top release point. So his fastball is going to have more of that run to it because he's able to get behind it more. And then his breaking pitches is going to have more of that depth to it, that straight up and down, that more closer to that 12-6 curveball type of a feel, even though he still throws it hard. So his breaking ball is more north-south, and you can see, his breaking pitches, like some of his ones that has the most amount of depth to it, will be negative 13, negative 14 on the y-axis plot. So those are two different examples of players who are two different types of arm slots. We're more north-south with Glasnow, and then Logan Webb, who's more that east-west, closer to sidearm. And then right in the middle is going to obviously be at what we talked about as the average pitch plot. And then the last thing I will say when I talk with hitters is, okay, like how will we beat them, and then how they will beat us? Because I think it's like, okay, if we can stick to our game plan, this is how we're going to beat them. And then if we abort mission and we don't stick to our game plan, then this is how they're going to beat us. And so that's usually the final message that I'll give to hitters, at the end of meetings, or if I'm just working with a hitter, is to simplify it at the very end. how we're going to beat them, and then how we're going to beat us. Hope you enjoyed today's episode on game planning and utilizing movement plots. If you enjoyed this, please share it with somebody. And if you are not subscribed to our free weekly newsletter, it's called The Hitting Chronicle. Head to patrickjonesbaseball.com and sign up. It's completely free. Have over 6,500 coaches and players already reading it every week. And we give one actionable free tip to help hitters develop every single week. Hope you enjoyed this. My name is Patrick Jones, and we'll see everybody next time.